This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm with Angela Richardson, who has been Guildford's MP since the last election in 2019 and is now standing to return to Parliament as a member of the Conservative Party. Angela, thank you for giving your time for this interview with the Guildford Dragon.
It's a pleasure. I think it's always important to engage with you at the Guildford Dragon on all the questions that you want to ask. I will try and be as concise as possible because we've been out campaigning three times a day, every day since the general election was called. So I'm missing my Sunday morning campaigning session, but I'm very happy to do so.
Well, you've taken the words from my mouth, because I was going to ask, as I do with all the candidates, for concise answers. And if I feel that if I feel I need to manage the time, I will do so. Okay,
Good.
First of all, then straight into it. Housing and Greenbelt. How can voters trust the Conservative Party on Greenbelt conservation, given your track record here in Guildford Borough?
So I've been out on the doors chatting to people who are right on the coalface of decisions that were made by the Conservative Party and the local plan of 2019 about how they're feeling about, in particular, over in the Eastern Villages, the Wisley development, which was recently approved. And I've been talking through with those residents about what can be done, our next steps. They understand that this election is not a planning election, but it's about big national issues. And many of them, even though they have been upset with the local Conservative Party, are still voting for me as Conservatives themselves because of their values and the fact that I represent those values and the things that the Conservative Party are putting forward.
But the government does set the planning policy, doesn't it, nationally?
Yeah. So my record that I would point to is the fact that I worked with 100 other Conservative MPs to talk about the impact of some of that national policy on our local areas. The South East in particular has been overheated with development, and we don't have the infrastructure to match. So what we got out of government was a removal of those top-down housing targets. At the moment, both Labour and the Lib Dems have top-down housing targets that will be set by government nationally without local ability to override them. That is the fundamental difference between the two of us. I think what we want to do is always prioritise on brownfield development, and we've put £60 million into unlocking brownfield over the course of the Parliament. So one of the other things I've done is spoken with local councillors out in the Eastern Villages, because I believe in the current local plan review, which I've been calling for years now. There is an opportunity to look at some of the buffer sites that were in the local plan in 2019 in other areas of Guildford, which were not included, take out some of the green belt or put back into green belt some of the green belt that was taken out. That is a possibility, but it requires absolute political will and the ability to drive that through. And I'm just not seeing that with the current administration at Guildford Borough Council.
Okay,
but I do know those councillors can do that.
Excuse me, but so you think the council have been wrong not to conduct a review of the local plan, and you also think it is possible to return some areas to the green belt, because the other people say that's not possible or very unlikely.
So I think the people who say anything's impossible have given up. I never give up with anything that I do. When the first answer is no, I think, well, let's see if we can find another way around the obstacle. In fact, you can put sites back into Greenbelt, but you have to exchange them for other sites. So it requires negotiation and it requires political will. I think this review should have been done a long time ago, when we discovered that the road infrastructure improvements that were promised as part of the local plan were not being delivered. That actually it negated aspects of delivery of the local plan. I think when you look back and see that we took 50% of Woking's unmet need between Guildford and Waverley, there is an argument that perhaps the numbers were overinflated. All of this work could have been done, but there was a lack of political will at the council. And, you know, to be fair to them, they were dealing, like I was dealing, like the government was dealing with COVID, you know, with just unprecedented circumstances, and we were having to deal with all sorts of a range of things.
But
I believe,
but for the local plan development, you mean? I mean, the local plan was adopted in 2019 before COVID came along.
No, I know that, but what I'm saying is subsequent to that, where other councillors came in on a promise some of them said that they would reverse the local plan. Now, that's not possible, but they were elected on a promise to local residents that they would unwind things that they felt had been done incorrectly. But nothing happened.
Okay.
Nothing happened for four years.
Okay. Now, your party has historically taken donations from developers. Can you commit to your party not doing so in future?
Well, I'm not aware of big developers giving huge donations to the Conservative Party for quite a few years now. I know that that has been the case in the past, and I certainly know some of my colleagues on their financial register of interests, which are easy to go and have a look at, have received donations from various different
I mean,
people.
you yourself have declared taking tickets from, was it one of
I
the?
went to Yes, from Barrett Homes, I went to go and see the All
Okay.
Blacks play England at Twickenham. As a native New Zealander, that was a
Okay.
great thing to do. I
But
can
can you
promise
commit to
you,
the party
Barrett
not
Homes,
doing? Can you commit
Barrett
to the
Homes got
party
nothing
not
out of
doing
me
so
for
in
that.
future? No, okay, but
I can't commit on behalf of the party. I'm afraid I'm not the Prime Minister, and
okay.
certainly if I'm not re-elected by the good people of Guildford, I will never be the Prime Minister
But
or the leader of the
would you
party.
support such a policy if it's debated within your party?
I think if Labour were willing to not take any money from trade unions, then I think we'd all be on a level playing field. So
Okay.
I think everyone has to come to the table on that.
Right. And aren't there other measures rather than building on greenfield sites that can be taken to increase housing supply?
Yes, so that brownfield first policy that I talked about, our urban centres, gentle densification, looking at how we use our town centres, whether there is property that's available that could be turned into residential. The balance has got to be right. I am slightly worried about too much development happening in Guildford town centre. I have read the sort of Shaping Guildford's Future. I'm very supportive of the improvements to the riverside and flood alleviation that would bring that about.
Building
What I am,
heights? Building
but
heights?
we should have done that. This is something that really, where is the political will in our local councillors to recognise that there was a problem, that we were punished for not having
Well,
those policies in place?
where was it before the local plan was adopted when the Conservatives were in charge?
So I think it was being discussed as something that had to go in because I think the Solent project, which we are seeing now dominate the skyline by the train station in
Hmm.
Guildford, was something that it was
Well, that was
the
forced on
local.
the council, yes.
It was forced on the council, and
By a
from that point,
Conservative minister, by the way.
by a planning inspector. I
Yes,
think
but approved by a Conservative minister.
there is a misunderstanding between a planning inspector looking at something and it going to the Secretary of State. I can give you a good example. The Wisley development went to the planning inspector because it was not determined by Guildford Borough Council councillors within the period of time laid down. If it had been determined by them, there would have been an opportunity for the sitting MP Paul Beresford to ask for the Secretary of State to intervene. Then it wouldn't go to the planning inspector. It would be looked at by the ministers in the department if the Secretary of State had to recuse himself. I did that with the North Street development. I was
So
able
why
to.
didn't your colleague do that with Wisley then?
I don't know. I can't speak for
Okay.
him. But the thing is, it went from being potentially being able to be determined or turned down by locally elected councillors. Local democracy was denied in that respect because planning at Guildford Borough Council has gone from being one of the best in the country under the Conservatives to one of the worst. I'm not making that up. People can go and check that out. We've
Yeah.
had huge
I think
problems with planning.
that performance measurement, though, was on the speed of processing planning applications, not
Well,
on
there you
the.
go.
Yeah.
Wisley, perfect example, couldn't determine it within the time laid down. Therefore, the developer said, right, we're not waiting for you. I think the council asked them to wait, and they said, no, we're going straight to the.
Well, the council, my recollection is the council asked them to wait because they hadn't got replies from the developers that they felt they needed.
Well, I'm afraid developers are very canny in knowing how to work around
Yes, yeah, I'm sure
what
you're right
councils
on
can
that.
do.
Mm.
And that requires both officers and councillors within the council to know how the system works.
Okay.
And we've had a lack of that in the last few years.
Okay, now your colleague Jeremy Hunt in the neighbouring constituency, when I interviewed him, he seemed unconcerned with the level of development in Surrey. Are you?
I think Jeremy's words, and he's used them. He's doing a lot of meetings in villages at the moment, and this came up at a meeting just the other night in Share. What he understands is that people in Guildford who have got children and grandchildren, they want them to live nearby. And I've always said, even when I was elected in 2019, we've got to have the right houses in the right places. But the thing is, we can't just have development anywhere. We don't have the infrastructure for it. They always promise infrastructure first, and it's something we as a government, Conservative government, has said should come first. But the reality is they get the planning permission through. They don't have to deliver on parts of the infrastructure, so they just build the houses.
But Angela, I
If we
would like
take,
my son to be able to afford to live nearby here.
yeah,
But the average price in this area, I think I read, is nearly £400,000. He can't afford that. And so
yeah.
this isn't the current policies aren't going to help our children, are they? Because the houses go on the open market. They're there for the highest bidder.
And I've never seen a policy intervening on housing, which means you get more housing and the price goes down, especially not in London and the Southeast, which has been why it's been important to pursue the levelling up policies that we have been. It's not a completed project. It takes 20 and 30 years to undo neglect in other parts of the country, to build houses there, to make sure that there are also jobs there in the local economy so that people don't need to move to London and the Southeast. There has been a real disparity and fairness across the country, which we've been trying to address as Conservatives. Michael Gove, before he stepped down, likened it to being a half-built cathedral. This is a great big plan which will do wonders for the country and for regions. But for too long, we've been taking too much of that pressure in the Southeast. When we had water difficulties, and I know you're moving on to water, Martin, but when we had no water for 9 days last November, I got to the point where I just said, no more housing until we can get these things sorted out. I
But
feel that strongly
has that
about it.
happened? I mean, we can't have a moratorium on new housing until the water infrastructure's sorted out, can we?
No, we can't, but we can have representatives who absolutely fight really hard, as I have, get involved in local planning applications. Believe me, the advice we get as MPs, and have done for years, is stay out of planning. You know, you'll never win. But I see sitting on the fence and staying out of planning is actually abdicating responsibility. So I've got really stuck in. I've learned about local planning applications. I've spoken to local people, and I have made comments on applications and objections to one. And I think the most recent example was that it's upset some of the cathedral and some of the churchgoers there, and I can understand that. But the Stag Hill application was denied by the planning inspector, and there were good reasons for that. And you know, there are cases where there have been sites allocated in the local plan. That was one of them, where what is being proposed is not suitable for Guildford. And you've got to have an MP who's willing to stand up and say something publicly about planning.
Okay, but that was for 140 houses, if my memory serves, or maybe 120. I can't remember quite. But you know, it was a small scale development compared with the much bigger ones that people are concerned about.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. That size doesn't matter. The impact on local residents is what you need to judge this by.
Okay, well, let's move on to I think a linked subject, which is migration. Because do you accept that some of the housing demand is generated by the increase in population, which in turn is generated by the high levels of net migration? Do you accept that?
I do, and I accept that it's not just demand on housing, it's demand on all of our public services. As I've said to you in interviews in the past, that I don't feel that Guildford has been right on the front line of illegal migration, for instance, because in the previous Guildford constituency that I represented, there were no asylum hotels, and we were not seeing the small boats coming over as you would have been if you lived in Dover. I think what we've done as a government is we've laid out two parts to it: illegal and legal migration. On illegal migration, we have put three lots of legislation through, and I will say that Labour have voted against our plans 139 times, but that if you come here illegally, that you will be detained and removed. We've put tougher sentences in for people who smuggle people across the channel. So we've been giving the National Crime Agency more funding. We've been working with the French, and we have detained in 2022 or arrested 384 suspects that have been engaged in this. I think also it's important to say we have been working with our international partners. And last year, they believe that they stopped 26,000 people coming across the channel. So we
Who's that?
don't,
The French?
working with the French, we put
So who stopped them? The
hundreds of
French
millions of
or
pounds in,
French?
working our people, working with the French,
Okay.
going all the way upstream of this people smuggling business. We've actually stopped an additional 26,000 coming
So do
over.
you think that the French are well motivated to stop this illegal crossing of the channel? And if they are, why can't they be, given the current, current ability with technology, drones, etc., why can't they be more effective to stop these? Because surely an important aspect of this, regardless of the migration, is that people are dying in the channel, and no one
Yeah.
wants to, do they?
Yeah, so I would say you cannot put a price on any policy that is equal to the lives of those people lost. And I would say that very strongly. And, you'll probably ask me about Rwanda and that deterrent, but I would say very strongly that you can't put a price on the number of people that you would be able to do that with. Probably to start with, I would say there was a frustration with the border patrols on the beaches of northern France. But I certainly know that more recently, it's been much more effective. And very recently, a documentary team went over and actually interviewed some of the people, and I believe some of the people who were doing the people smuggling, and they said their business is drying up because people are aware of the Rwanda deterrent. It's
Okay,
finally
fair enough.
trickling through.
So you think it will be effective, but is it a moral solution given that we are effectively exporting the problem to another country?
It's a moral solution, and if it wasn't, there wouldn't be 20 European countries now looking at third country solutions for what is a global problem.
If I see
Um,
someone else shoplifting, it doesn't mean it's okay for me to do the same, does it?
no, absolutely not. But I think, again, if I'm saying that there is no financial price that you can put on lives, there is no moral price that you can put on what do you do to stop these people.
Okay, but couldn't we do something effective within our own jurisdiction?
Well, I'm sure other parties would like to be able to do that, but what we've essentially been doing is onboarding the most huge cost to UK taxpayers, £8
Okay.
million a day. When you interviewed me a couple of years ago, it was £6 million a day. That over the course of a year is just huge.
Now,
We've got to be able to house people properly. We also have to treat them if they've got medical conditions. So everybody who's coming over, wherever they go in the country, then gets priority GP appointments
yeah,
to make sure that they are fit and well. And that's actually stopping other people from being able to get GP appointments who are in this country. There is
but
a
that's
fairness at the heart
confirming
of all of
that
this.
is confirming the link between population growth and resource levels. But your party has increased the amount, a much bigger number of legal migration, and that's happened because of government policy and their visa issuing policy, hasn't it?
Well, I tell you what, as an MP, you get to deal with lots of visa immigration cases. It's part of the bread and butter. It's the sort of thing that local councillors can't do. So the MP has to take on all of that work. And I've done a huge amount in terms of helping families and their loved ones, but especially with Ukraine. So one of the reasons the population figures have gone up is because we have created these safe routes for people in times of crisis. And by controlling our borders where we can, we are able to offer these to the Hong Kongers, to the Ukrainians, to the Afghans, and in times gone past to the Syrians.
But Angela,
But
if you totaled all the Ukrainian refugees and all the Hong Kongers, it wouldn't equate to the over 700,000 that we've seen as net migration in the last 2 years.
it doesn't. And one of the things that we've done as a government is we have cracked down on some of the abuses of the legal migration route. So we're predicting that what we're doing is going to bring it down by 300,000, which is quite significant. So what we've done is we've ended the abuse of the health and care visa. And look, I was getting applications for people to try and help me with their very almost adult children. In fact, some of them had passed and become adults, saying that they needed to come over with their parents. I
Okay.
accept that we need people coming in to help us where we've got shortages in certain occupations. We have a list of occupations where we will try and get people to come in because
So
we
what's
don't have
that
enough
figure? What's that figure
homegrown.
for net
That
migration
will come
to?
down by 120,000 is what
Okay.
they are expecting. The other thing is that we raised the minimum earnings threshold for skilled workers. Now, that has made it difficult for some companies in Guildford to employ the sort of talent that they want on that skilled migration visa. But we think it's the right thing to do because it's about fairness and making sure that there is fairness for people who have been working hard and developing their skills in the UK to have the same opportunity as
Okay.
skilled people coming
I'm
in from
afraid
overseas.
we are up against time here, so I
Yeah.
need even
But
more concise.
we realize there's a problem and we're trying to tackle it.
Okay. Now, on the cost of living, what will the Conservative Party do to make life more affordable for those on lower incomes? And we've got, people on lower incomes here in Guildford too, haven't we?
We certainly do. And actually, I've done a huge amount of work as Guildford's MP to help people who are struggling the most in Guildford. And in fact, I was talking about what MPs can do that councillors can't do. What many people may not realise is just how much council casework I've taken on. And housing in particular, over 500 housing casework that I've done since I became the MP for Guildford. That's not just one email, that's multiple contacts backwards and forwards representing those people. That's what borough councillors normally have to do. Send special educational needs, over 90 cases. That's normally the county councillor gets involved. But I've been very happy to go and help anyone who needs help. What we've done through COVID and through the energy crisis that was caused by Russia invading Ukraine is that we have had a household support fund. What that is we've given £3 billion to local authorities to then give to the most vulnerable. Local authorities know their vulnerable families much better than central government does, so it's right that we trickle that money down to go out. We uprated benefits in line with inflation. So in the same way we helped pensioners by giving them 10.1% the previous year and 8.5% in line with the inflation figure as it was set in October of the previous year, we have made sure we uprated benefits. The other thing is we raised local housing allowance. That was a really important thing because that had been frozen for a long time. And people who are on benefits still have to pay rent. So we needed to help and support them.
Okay.
And
But
we
all
did
that stuff is
cost of
what you've
living payments.
done,
Yeah.
Angela, and it may be very laudable, but what can you do to improve it further?
So I think it's just about making sure. What I would say is that our record demonstrates our commitment to the people who are the most vulnerable and have the least. And I think judge us by what we have done in the most extreme times. We will keep helping people in the future.
So
Sorry, you
you're
look like you're
saying
about to
that
come in.
you can't name the policies now, but you are committed to keep helping the people on lower incomes. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you're interviewing me before the manifestos have been
Yes,
launched,
I realise that.
Martin, and probably for the other parties as well.
Yeah.
And so I'm not able to put meat on the bone of what we're going to promise to do. But I would say the Prime Minister says it, judge him by his record of what he's done. Furlough, protecting 12 million jobs.
Okay.
That kind of thing's really important. People, it's a good thing in some ways that some people have forgotten the level of support that went in through COVID. It means that they're getting on with their lives, which I think is important. We went through a hard time. I want to see growth and recovery in Guildford. I want to see people getting on with their lives. But what I know is that even if the economy improves, there will always be people who have need in Guildford because there always has been.
But
We've
that's
got
true,
2
but
wards
we should
that have
always bear them in
deprivation.
mind, shouldn't we? And try and help them.
We do. And Guildford is full of the most wonderfully caring, supportive people. We've got the highest number of charities registered in the country. We've got places like Guildford Philanthropy who just get involved where there's a need. And I've never known it to stop. There are so many examples of volunteers in Guildford who give up their time just to make sure that everyone's okay. I think the thing that concerned me during COVID in particular was I wasn't hearing enough from the people who needed my help the most. My inbox was absolutely full, but it was from people who were having arguments about policy as opposed to I genuinely need help. So I prioritize those people, and I want to make sure I hear from them.
Okay, now then, water. You said we're going to move on to water, and we are.
Yeah.
Hasn't the privatization model for the water supply industry simply failed?
So I think when water was initially privatized, it was a huge improvement. I don't know if people remember what the water was like around, in the country and around the beaches, etc., in the 1980s. But I hear stories. I wasn't living here then. I didn't come till 1999. But the stories that I've heard were that people were quite regularly swimming in the sea with all sorts of things that had just been flushed out and into the water. There was a huge amount of investment. Hang on, there was a huge amount of investment that went in the early period of privatization, but there was a period where interest rates went to their lowest, where companies like Thames Water that I have to deal with, their owners above borrowed to give money as dividends rather than investing, and that was the most disgraceful time in the history of water in terms of being privatized. What that meant was that Ofwat weren't set up to be monitoring the financial structures of those companies. They were set up to monitor how much bills were going to be for customers. And unfortunately, I think if you're a regulator, you need to be looking at the entire picture.
Okay.
As I said,
sorry,
in the
because I'm really conscious of time. I just want to move on to the last question. Shouldn't the movement of capital to subsidiary companies and abroad be prevented so that more urgently needed infrastructure improvements can be funded by these water companies?
So that's what we've done, Martin. So we recognise there was a problem. And I do think people should go back and look to see what the record was of people actually talking about this in previous elections, because we as a Conservative Party recognise there was a problem. It's why we brought through the Environment Act. It's why there's been such a stink kicked up about this, because we've made sure that people know there's a problem by monitoring, increasing it from 7% to 100%. Where water is still nationalised in Scotland, they are still sitting on 4% of monitoring, which is not good enough for the Scottish people.
But sorry, I just want to pin you down on this. So you're saying it's no longer possible for companies like Thames Water to move money to their subsidiaries or and therefore sometimes abroad?
So what I know is that Thames Water's operating company, which is separate from the the big structure over the top, which was Kemble Water, they've got £2.3 billion in reserves. Most of that money's been allocated to investment on infrastructure. We've got £93.1 million of that coming directly into Guildford to help us get the investment that we need and the resilience that we need in our local system.
Angela, you haven't answered my question. Is it now impossible for them to move the money like that?
I'm not going to pretend I know the exact answer to that exact question. I would hope that we have become aware of that as being an issue, but we have clamped down on the ability for bonuses to be paid to bosses where there are serious failings. We have prosecuted water companies. We've given more powers to Ofwat, and I think what we're trying to do is make sure that the water companies invest huge amounts of money. It's £56 billion into environmental improvements to reduce storm overflows. It's not a problem that you can fix overnight. Anybody who tells you that you can flick a switch and there'll be nothing going into our waterways they're lying to you, and there is an ideological element to it. To governors to choose, and you have to make sensible decisions when you're a legislator. You can't just do magical thinking. As much as we hate it, we have to be sensible about this, and I believe the Conservatives have brought forward a plan for water which is sensible and is possible.
Well, Angela Richardson, you've managed to stretch out this interview successfully. Thank you very much for answering my questions. I look forward to speaking to you at the count.
Thank you, Martin, very much. Look forward to seeing you then too.